All right, so the purpose of this lecture is to provide an overview of the concepts that are critical to understanding human physical development. So this lecture is divided into 4 sections. Human growth will focus mainly on the development of height and weight throughout the lifespan. Then we'll have a look at body composition, bone health, and then finally metabolism. So we are up to physical development, our third and final domain of human development. And physical development, it's concerned with the changes in our height, our weight, muscle mass, our fat mass, even our physical brain development as well. And often what we see is that there's fast changes from birth up until puberty, and then these changes stabilize over adulthood, and then finally there is a decline in late adulthood. So let's first have a look at human growth. Now there's 2 principles of human growth, and those are the cephalocaudal principle and the proximodistal principle. So across developmental stages, our growth occurs in different directions. This cephalocaudal principle is head to toe, and then proximodistal says midline to periphery. Now, for example, the head accounts for 25% of your length in an infant, but only 15% of adult height. So imagine if your head right now was 25% of your whole body height. It would look absolutely ridiculous. This is also the same for our limbs. So when you have a little baby, if you look at that first picture of that little alien baby with that massive head, the limbs are quite short in comparison to the body. So the legs account for about 38% of length at birth, and then they end up accounting for 50% of adult height. So these changes in the body proportions occur because different body parts grow at different rates, and from birth to adulthood, as the head doubles in size, so we've got a bigger head than we did when we were a kid, the trunk triples in length, and the arms and legs quadruple. So everything's growing, and they're growing through these 2 different principles. So if we first have a look at prenatal growth into infancy, we are developing from this microscopic zygote, which we saw was the very first stage of development of us, and we develop in our mum's tummies into this 50 centimeter newborn. So newborns normally 50 centimeters in length on average and weigh around 3 to 3.5 kilos. We said before that the head of a newborn makes up about 25% of its overall length, and there's great changes in height and weight in this infancy period. So in the first few months of life, gaining about 30 grams of weight per day and growing about 2.5 centimeters each month. And by 2 years old, we're actually half of our eventual human height, which you might not have thought previously. So if you go out onto the street, try and find a 2-year-old, you could pretty much guess that double them is going to be how tall they end up growing up. Okay, so during childhood, the rate of growth tends to increase at a slower rate than it does during those prenatal or infancy periods. So we're still growing, just not as fast as we were. Now, children tend to grow around 3 inches per year in height, and they gain approximately 2 to 3 kilograms per year in weight. Now, the brain reaches adult size at around 7 years old, but it's still continuing to develop at this time. Now, during childhood, the process of brain lateralization also takes place. Now, we know that the brain is comprised of 2 halves, 2 hemispheres, the right and the left cerebral hemisphere. And lateralization refers to the localization or the organization of functions and skills in their particular hemisphere. So specifically things like language, writing, and mathematical skills seem to be located in the left hemisphere, while other things like creativity, fantasy, artistic or musical skills appear to be located in the right hemisphere. So the two cerebral hemispheres develop at different rates as well, with the left hemisphere developing more fully in early childhood, so between 2 to 6 years old, and then the right hemisphere developing more fully in middle adulthood, so from around 7 to 11 years old. And this may explain why children learn language so early and quickly. It's a little bit counterintuitive because you wouldn't think of the left hemisphere as developing first, the logical and mathematical side. You'd think of kids being more abstract and creative. But no, it is the opposite. Now, the key feature during adolescence is puberty. So puberty is a process of physical change where a child's body matures into an adult's body, and you're now capable of sexual reproduction. So we have the maturation of the uterus and the ovaries in girls and the testes in males. And we also have the development of secondary sexual characteristics like the development of breasts, hips, pubic hair, facial hair, deepened voices for males. So during adolescence, the brain is still developing. In particular, the frontal lobe of the brain continues developing through adolescence. Now, this area of the brain, it's responsible for judgment, for impulse control and planning as well. And so as this area of the brain is developing, this may result in adolescents being more likely to engage in risk-taking behavior like smoking or underage drinking, and emotional outbursts as well. And this part of the brain still can be maturing into early adulthood as well. So if we're in the early adulthood, so think your 20s or your 30s, the good news is that you're probably at the peak of your physiological development. Your reproductive system, your strength, your lung capacity are operating at the best that they ever will. So the bad news is that now these systems will start a slow, gradual decline, so that by the time you start to approach your mid to late 30s, you'll begin to notice signs of aging. So this includes things like the appearance of fine lines or wrinkles, and in middle adulthood, you may begin to experience a decline in vision or increases in joint pain or weight gain as well. Vision is affected by age. I'm sure you all know, dealing with parents or grandparents, that their vision does get affected with age. The eye loses some flexibility required to adjust to stimuli. And often these middle-aged adults have trouble seeing up close. So if you've ever noticed, if you hand a parent your phone to look at, they'll hold it really far away from their face and sort of squint to look at it from really far away. The good thing is that these changes during middle adulthood can be compensated for. You can buy glasses, you can start exercising or watching your diet. However, when we approach late adulthood, there are now significant changes in things like our skin and our hair. Our skin, it becomes drier, it's less elastic as we age. There's scars and imperfections which become more noticeable, because there's fewer cells growing underneath the surface of the skin. Exposure to the sun also accelerates those changes, and the graying of the hair is inevitable. We also experience hair loss all over the body during that late adulthood stage. There's also an increased prevalence of illness or disease in this population, and that can result in dramatic physical changes like rapid weight loss. Okay, so let's have a closer look at height now. This figure shows the typical curve for height across the lifespan. So if we have a look at childhood to adolescence firstly, this highlighted section here, there's a pretty linear rise in height from birth until early teenage years. Now, the adolescent growth spurt causes the greatest rate of growth in height. And this is referred to as the peak rate of growth. So it's where we're growing at our fastest rate. And it occurs earlier for girls. It's around 12 years for girls. And then for boys, it's around 13.4 years. So you might remember that time in probably primary school, close to the end of primary school, maybe year 5 or year 6, when all the girls outgrew the boys for 1 year. So girls normally achieve their adult height by around 16 years old, whereas boys can continue growing 18, 19, or even until they're 20 years old. Now, typically puberty occurs earlier for girls and it lasts a shorter amount of time for them, whereas for boys, they go through puberty later and it lasts longer. So that's why there's this disparity between genders here. And in terms of physical activity and the development of height in childhood and adolescence, you may have previously heard that physical activity stunts growth. In particular, resistance training stunts growth. Now, it's important to note that regular physical activity has no established effect on stature. This is something that we're going to look at in future weeks, but what some people say, it's actually very common. Some people think that partaking in gymnastics as a child results in a shorter stature in older age because look, see how short all the gymnasts are? Anyway, that's their argument. However, the difference in height among individuals participating in various sports, it's more likely due to the particular requirements of the sport. So for example, in that gymnastics example, the reason that we see so many short gymnasts is because being short is an advantage in gymnastics, not because gymnastics makes people short. And if you know anyone who uses that argument, there's quite a lot of people who do, it's pretty easy to convince them otherwise. Or if you want to take them down, here's how. Use basketball as an example. No one in their right mind would believe that playing basketball makes you tall. Now, the reason that there's so many tall basketballers is because being tall is an advantage in that sport. All right, now if we have a look at height during adulthood, we can see that height is relatively stable during early adulthood, and then height actually declines. So we get shorter at a rate of about 1 centimeter per decade during the 40s and 50s. So from 40 years old to 59, we decline about 2 centimeters in height. And this rate of decline accelerates after 60 years. So you can see that dip in the figure there, that's our rate of decline dropping. Typically, this is due to the compression and deterioration of the intervertebral discs. That is a normal process of aging. It can also be due to the thoracic spine curvature increasing, so an increasing kyphosis of the spine. And this means that we're more hunched over. So when you see that person with a hunchback, they're going to be shorter in stature. I knew this really sweet old man. He used to walk his dog every day, and he had such a pronounced thoracic curve that I think if you broke his spine and straightened it up, he would gain a good 30 centimeters or so. All right, so if we have a look at weight now, in childhood and adolescence, we see that total body weight increases in both sexes. So interestingly, the peak rate of growth for weight occurs around half a year later for both boys and girls than it did for height. So at around 12 and a half years for girls and at around 13.9 years old for boys. And this is the age when our body weight increases quickly. So boys lag behind girls again, same as with height, and this is due to the difference in the age of puberty. Now, while body weight increases for both sexes, it's distributed differently. So girls tend to gain extra fat, primarily in the breasts and the hips, and boys develop broader shoulders. So we also have to consider that both fat and muscle mass contribute to total body weight. So whilst body weight is increasing, there may be differences in the composition. The influence of fat versus muscle on body weight becomes more prevalent in adulthood. So body weight increases during the 30s, the 40s, and the 50s, most likely due to increases in body fat. Then we see that older people actually weigh less than what they did in midlife. So there's a decline in total body weight. And this decline, it's mainly due to a loss of muscle mass. Bones also lose density and can become more brittle, making them lighter. And this is especially prevalent in women. We also need to be careful of these rapid declines of weight in old age because they can be indicative of diseases such as cancer or gastrointestinal disease. All right, so we've spoken about human growth and we've looked in depth at the normative changes in height and weight during the lifespan. Now, we've already mentioned that total body weight can be influenced by either our amount of fat mass or muscle mass. So let's have a closer look now at all of the components of body composition. So when we measure our body composition, there's two main categories. There's the fat-free mass, which is also known as the lean body mass. And then there's also the fat mass, which is also known as adipose tissue. So the fat-free mass includes basically everything other than fat. So we have our muscles, our skeletal muscles, our smooth muscle, and the cardiac muscle. It also includes our bones, our organs, our heart, liver, stomach, gastrointestinal tract as well. We've also got the connective tissue like our ligaments and tendons, and then finally also body water as well. And then we have the fat mass, which has two main components. It's got the essential fat and the non-essential fat. So your body needs a certain amount of fat to function properly. So men require around 2 to 5% body fat, and women need a little bit more at around 10 to 13% body fat. So the next time you see some sort of popular fitness chain saying that some dude got down to 1% body fat in the challenge, you might want to think twice about how accurate that reporting is, because we need a certain amount of body fat to actually function as human beings. Now, this essential fat, it plays a major role in regulating hormones, fertility, it helps with vitamin absorption, and it also is important for temperature regulation. So this essential body fat, it's found in our brain, in our bone marrow, and even surrounding our neurons, our nerve cells. It's not that fat that lies under our skin. That's our subcutaneous fat. And along with the visceral fat, which is the fat surrounding our organs, it makes up our non-essential fat. So non-essential fat is fat that isn't needed for essential functions. It could also be called excess fat. Now, the only real function of this type of fat is that it provides some insulation and it can help protect our vital organs by giving a little cushioning around them. So our body composition, it's measured by DEXA scan. We can see it in this photo here. And this is actually taken at Moore Park at UTS. We have a DEXA scan there on level 4. So the machine scans us and it can tell us our proportion of fat mass to fat-free mass. Now, the largest change in body composition occurs during the adolescent growth spurt, which occurs around puberty. We already saw that this puberty time results in peak rates of growth for both height and weight. So over a 10-year period, so 5 years before the adolescent growth spurt and 5 years after, girls can gain approximately 20 to 40 kilograms of fat-free mass, so muscle, bone, organs. And then boys can gain more fat-free mass at around 25 to 60 kilos within that 10-year period surrounding the growth spurt. And that's due to a rapid increase in muscle mass, in organ size, bone density, and water. So both men and women gain fat-free mass during this time. However, there is a difference for fat mass. So we can see on this figure here, we've got men in the dotted line and women in the solid line, and they're plotting body fat against age. And around that adolescent time period, men actually have a decline in fat mass. So there's a decline in fat mass for boys, whereas fat mass for girls continues to increase. So we're going to have a closer look at the changes in fat-free mass and fat mass across the lifespan now. So fat-free mass peaks shortly after puberty. So in most cases, we reach this peak by the end of adolescence or the start of early adulthood. And we may be able to maintain this peak in our muscle mass, our bone mass, and organ mass as well. We might be able to maintain it for a little while with appropriate training and diet, but it's likely that we'll never... it's likely that that will be the greatest amount of fat-free mass that we ever have. So we'll never reach the same level of fat-free mass in later life. It's very unlikely that we will. It would take a lot more effort. And this is why it's so important for physical activity to be promoted in children and adolescents, because we want to increase that peak so that we have a higher muscle mass, a higher bone density throughout our lifespan. So physical activity, it significantly influences the growth of fat-free mass during adolescence, and this might be due to the circulating testosterone and growth hormone during this time that results in large skeletal muscle growth. Now, in adulthood, males have around 150% of the fat-free mass of an average adult female, and that's mainly due to greater muscle mass as the result of more testosterone. Also, males are generally a larger size than females, so their organs would be bigger and weigh more. Now, in contrast to childhood and adolescence, physical activity in adulthood has a very little effect on fat-free mass. So, unfortunately, you can't go to the gym as a 40-year-old and expect to walk out as an Adonis. That might have been possible in adolescence, but the critical time has passed now. So when we begin to approach older adulthood, we end up actually losing fat-free mass, and there's an approximate loss of around 4 kilos between 50 to 89 years of age. It doesn't sound like much, but 4 kilos is quite a lot of fat-free mass. This is mainly due to the atrophy of muscles. So muscle mass is lost, and it's lost preferentially from the lower body. And this can result in plenty of negative outcomes, such as an increased difficulty performing functional tasks or activities of daily living. So is there a way to mitigate this loss of muscle mass? What can we do? You might be asking, what about resistance training? So the current evidence suggests that a resistance training program can elicit an approximate 1 kilogram increase in muscle mass among older adults. Only 1 kilo from resistance training, you're only going to get a 1 kilo increase. So it's not much compared to the loss of 4 kilos that you're likely going to incur. So you would still have this net loss of lean body mass or fat-free mass. So this researcher, Peterson, they found that the volume of training and the age of participation are really important determinants for the effectiveness of a resistance training program. So they suggest that higher dosages, so more volume, results in a greater adaptive response. So if we do more training, we might be able to get a bit more than that 1 kilo increase. And they also found that aging people should consider starting as soon as possible to optimize their results. So you don't want to wait till it's all too late. Now, while resistance training may not completely mitigate the decline in fat-free mass, you're still going to probably lose more than you end up gaining. It's still extremely important for older people. So it was going to help maintain physical fitness and physical capacity through older age. All right, now when we look at fat mass. Both boys and girls start off with a similar amount of body fat, and this lasts until about 10 years of age. Then, unfortunately for the girls, we gain fat mass at a rate of around 1.14 kilos per year during puberty. And the boys, they have a decrease in fat mass at around a similar amount per year. Now, this is the same graph that we saw in a slide before, and we can clearly see that dip, that decline in fat mass that the boys experience during puberty. However, after puberty, we're all in the same boat. We have this stable rise in body fat throughout our adulthood. And what actually occurs during adulthood, it's quite interesting. We have this accumulation through 30s, 40s, 50s, so on. But our fat mass actually redistributes. So it's almost as if our subcutaneous fat moves from under the skin and becomes visceral fat, which surrounds our organs. So there's this redistribution. And this is especially prevalent in men. And think about older men who typically present with that beer belly type shaped body. Now, carrying too much of this visceral fat that surrounds the organs can be extremely harmful. It's linked to a higher risk of type 2 diabetes, insulin resistance, heart disease, and it's even been linked to some cancers as well. So what's the cause of this accumulation of body fat during adulthood, and what can we do to prevent it? Well, fat mass accumulation is a result of a positive energy balance. So you're consuming more energy than you're expending. And after an extended period of time in a positive energy balance, the fat gain will be very clear. So in order to prevent this age-related increase in body fat, what should we be focusing on, the physical activity or the energy intake? Well, in most cases, when we're talking about the general population, the answer to that question is energy intake. So if we're talking about someone in this general population, let's say someone who's previously been a couch potato, getting them to perform the recommended amount of physical activity, which is 150 minutes per week, isn't likely going to result in fat loss, and it's probably not going to prevent weight gain in the future either. So when you're doing just enough, when you're just meeting the physical activity recommendations, the effects are likely going to be small. So for these people, it's the change in energy intake that will have the most profound effect on fat mass. And we'll have a look at why that is now. So in order to get a clearer picture of this relationship, we need to first look at how physical activity levels actually change across the lifespan. So for the normal person, we'll start off with a sedentary lifestyle. We're a baby, we're sitting in a pram, sleeping in a cot, not doing much else. Then we see this sharp increase in physical activity levels at childhood and adolescence. We've learned to walk, we're attending school, we start running around, playing with friends, we maybe join a team sport or something. During adulthood, we maintain a moderately active lifestyle, and then we gradually return to sedentary again at old age. So with this gradual decline in physical activity that sort of begins in middle and lasts to older adulthood, we must have a concomitant decline or a simultaneous decline in energy intake in order to maintain our energy balance. So if we're moving less, we need to eat less to maintain our body weight. Now, researchers have shown that older adults, or that old age, results in a decreased ability to regulate energy intake. So this researcher Stubbs showed that by enforcing sedentary behavior on a bunch of people over 7 days, there was a huge effect on energy balance. So this figure shows the cumulative energy balance for subjects in the study. Now, the squares reflect those who were required to be sedentary for the duration of the experiment, and the diamonds are the subjects who are allowed to be active and maintain their physical activity during the experiment. So what we can see here is that over the 7 days of sedentary behavior, the participants didn't match their energy intake to their physical activity levels. So they were doing way less activity, but they were still eating the same, and that resulted in an increased energy balance. So this research found that reducing physical activity doesn't induce these compensatory reductions in energy intake. So this would then lead to positive energy balance and fat gain. And this might be the reason that we see a steady increase in fat mass during adulthood. So as we progress through adulthood, we start doing less and less physical activity throughout each day, but we don't necessarily change our eating habits to account for this gradual decline in physical activity. All right, so we've gone over the changes that occur in our body composition across the lifespan. We saw that physical activity during adolescence is a determinant of peak fat-free mass, and thus it's important for maintaining fat-free mass during adulthood. We spoke about how with aging, we may decrease our physical activity, but without simultaneous decreases in energy intake, we will gain fat mass. And then finally, the prevention of excess body fat is greatly influenced by energy intake rather than physical activity in the general population. Okay, so we're on to part 3 now, where we're going to look closer at one of the components of fat-free mass, which is our bones and our bone health. Now, bones are the framework of our bodies, and bone, it's a living tissue that's constantly changing, with old bits of bone being removed and broken down and replaced with new bone constantly. So bone mineral density, it's the amount of mineral matter per square centimeter of bone, and it's sometimes referred to as bone mass. Now, the more dense the bone is, the stronger it is, whereas the more porous and holy a bone is, the more likely it is to fracture. And we know that from Wolff's Law that our bones respond to stresses placed upon them. So exercise and physical activity is going to be one of the major determinants of bone density throughout our lifespan. When we look at osteoporosis, there's a couple of stages. So we have a normal bone, and some bone loss is referred to as osteopenia. So this is the step between healthy and osteoporotic bone, that osteopenia. Now, osteoporosis here, it's defined as a progressive skeletal disease that's characterized by low bone mass and deterioration of bone tissue, with consequent increases in bone fragility and susceptibility to fracture. So let's have a look now at the normal trends of our bone density across the lifespan. Now, during infancy and early childhood, we have equal amounts of organic and inorganic components. So the organic being our collagen and inorganic being calcium and so on. And this makes the bones soft, it makes them pliable and difficult to break. So if you've ever seen a newborn baby being born, sometimes you'll see the doctors or the midwives grab the baby quite hard, and you think, oh shit, like, is that going to break the baby? But normally it's very difficult to break a baby's bone because of this equal amount of collagen and calcium. Now, this also means that the bones of an infant are too flexible to sit up or balance. Now, in youth, new bone is formed faster than it's absorbed, and this results in a net growth in bone mass. So we can see from birth to 20s or 30s, our bone mineral density is constantly increasing, our bone mass is increasing. And that increase lasts until around the mid to late 20s, where we hit peak bone mass. So peak bone mass, it's the amount of bone gained by the time a stable skeletal state has been formed. And it reflects the maximum bone mass attained across the lifespan. So the peak is the peak. We're not going to get much more than that. And up to 90% of that peak bone mass, it's acquired by age 20. So This makes adolescence the best time to invest in our bone health, because if we increase that peak, we're going to maintain a higher bone mass throughout our life. Now, the level of peak bone mass is a predictor of osteoporosis, because if we have a lower peak bone mass, then through the aging process, when we lose bone density, we're more likely to reach osteoporotic status faster than someone who had a higher peak bone mass in their 20s. And what they've suggested is that a 10% increase in peak bone mass could delay the onset of osteoporosis by 13 years, which is quite a long time. So we said that 90% of our peak bone mass is achieved by 20 years old, and this is then followed by an age-related decline in bone mineral density. Now, in adulthood, new bone formation slows, and eventually we can't keep up with the reabsorption, so we have this net bone loss. And once we enter this age-related bone loss period, it's really hard to generate sufficient stimulus to increase bone mass. So if we start with a lower peak bone mass, this is going to carry into old age and make us more at risk of osteopenia or osteoporosis. Now, the age-related decline in bone loss is more rapid for females, especially when they enter this postmenopausal period. It becomes around 2 to 3% reduction in bone density per year. And this is because the protective effect of estrogen on the bone drops out. We've got no more of that protective estrogen. So it is so important to take care of our bone health during that adolescence and early adulthood period, because the bone loss it's an inevitable process of aging. So if we maximize our bone mineral accrual during growth and do exercise during adolescence, especially during the pre-pubertal years, so before puberty, we can build our skeleton with a higher bone mineral density. This would lead to stronger bones that would be more resistant to trauma, fracture, or osteoporosis throughout life. So we really want to try and elevate that peak bone mass as much as possible. Now, unfortunately, osteoporosis is a very prevalent disease. About 70% of Australians have either osteoporosis or osteopenia. That's of Australians over 50 years old. And we see it's more prevalent in women. So 1 in 2 older women versus 1 in 3 older men presenting with some sort of osteoporosis or osteopenia. Now, such a high prevalence of these conditions results in a large amount of bone fractures in older populations. 70% of the bone fractures due to poor bone density occur in women. So a hip fracture being the most serious of these. And it's really sad, but around half of older patients who fracture their hip don't return to normal independent living. So it's such a serious injury in this population that a lot of old people who fracture their hip because of poor bone density never recover, or they never leave hospital. And this can be just from falling over. They can fracture their hip and then, have this horrible outcome. So how can we prevent this? Now, we've already said that childhood and adolescence is that most critical period for bone density accrual, for bumping up our peak bone mass. So let's have a look at how exercise and physical activity can influence our bone health during this period. Now, Baxter and Jones conducted a study of 3 groups of adolescents. So they observed these participants across a number of years during adolescence and grouped them into inactive, active, and average groups. Now, they wanted to know if the benefits of physical activity in adolescence persist into adulthood. And what they found was that physically active adolescents were able to maintain their higher bone mineral content into their 30s compared to their less active peers. So it was found that adolescents had around 8 to 10% more bone mineral content at the total hip and femoral neck sites. Now, these results suggest that the skeletal benefits of physical activity in adolescence are able to be maintained into young adulthood. So they only measured these participants again at 30 years old. It would have been interesting to see what about at 50 years old as well, but we can definitely say that they're able to be maintained into the young adulthood period. Now, these effects were apparent for both males and females. So if we miss out on this critical time in adolescence of training, so normally during adolescence, a lot of our activity is dictated by our parents. Now, what happens if we didn't do much during adolescence and we start training in adulthood? Are the beneficial effects of exercise on bone health going to be the same? So adults can benefit from bone loading exercise. However, the benefit is of a lesser extent than it is in children or adolescents. And Bassi examined the bone accrual after a 12-month exercise training intervention in both pre- and post-menopausal women. So what they got is this group of women to do lots of high impact exercise. They were doing vertical jump training 6 times per week over 12 months. And it resulted in a 2.8% increase in femoral bone mineral density in the pre-menopausal women. So before menopause, we saw this 2.8% increase. However, no improvements were shown in the post-menopausal women after the training intervention. So from these results, we can see that adults can accrue bone mineral density with high impact training, but 2.8% isn't substantial. And it's definitely not as much as what we would expect to gain if we did the same type of training during our adolescence. Now, postmenopausal women may be unable to accrue bone mass with exercise. So the dropout of that estrogen may prevent them from increasing their bone mineral density with exercise. Now, even though the skeletal benefits of exercise in these postmenopausal women are negligible, exercise may still have a preventative effect and contribute to bone density preservation. So even though the bone mass may not be improving, we may still be able to decline the inevitable, we may be able to delay the inevitable decline in bone density throughout adulthood. And we can see here the typical bone adaptation across the lifespan. So in the solid line, we have the average trajectory. So an increase during childhood that results in that peak bone mass in our 20s or so. And then that's followed by a gradual decline in bone density in old age that can result in this osteoporosis. Now, if we implement appropriate exercise in adolescence, we can significantly bump up that peak bone mass, and then that can reduce our risk of fracture or osteoporosis in later life. If we start incorporating appropriate exercise in adulthood, we can still get these preventative effects, but they're of a lesser extent than the effect seen in childhood and adolescence. Now, it's important to say that appropriate exercise can have these beneficial effects. And I say appropriate exercise because some sports can promote the accrual of bone density, whereas other sports can actually have a negative effect. So sports that are generally good for developing bone mass and bone density include weightlifting, resistance training, rugby, soccer, and there's many more than just listed there. But essentially any sport that's weight-bearing, high impact and high intensity, and it has a multi-directional nature, and we can expect to see a beneficial effect on bone mass. Remember, bones respond to the stress placed upon them. So in a sport where there's no weight bearing, we would see the opposite effect occur and a decline in bone mass. For example, swimming or cycling, they are both non-weight bearing, and we generally see athletes with a lower bone density. And by this, I don't mean that they're low, like they're at a risk of osteoporosis, but I mean that they're lower than the other sports that we said previously, like weightlifting. So they're not necessarily have this really weak skeleton, but in comparison to other sports, they have a lower bone density. So another factor that can have a negative effect on bone mineral density is the dehydration and calcium loss that can be associated with long endurance-based training. Now, whilst distance running, for example, it's a high-impact sport, we're running around high impact, there are negative effects of this long endurance exercise on bone density. So the positive and the negative end up kind of ruling each other out. The other sports that we can see a lower bone density in is sports that have a calorie restriction aspect. The examples that we have here are ballet dancers and jockeys. So jockeys have to obviously cut weight, and it's a bit of a stigma with the ballet dancers that they have to be a certain weight. So this isn't necessarily to say that all the athletes who participate in these sports are restricting themselves, but long-term low energy availability can definitely have significant negative effects on our bone density and our bone health. All right, so some key points from this bone health part of the lecture. We saw that around 90% of peak bone mass is achieved by 20 years, and the childhood and adolescence periods are the critical time for skeletal development, developing our peak bone mass. Appropriate exercise in adulthood can have preventative effects on the development of osteoporosis. However, the effects are larger if we begin exercising earlier, like in adolescence. And we saw that weight-bearing sports provide the greatest stimulus for bone density accrual, and this follows Wolff's law. Okay, so we've gone through human growth, body composition, and bone health, and now we're going to have a look at metabolism. So changes in energy regulation occur during normal aging. And in this part 4, we're going to look at the data on age-related changes in energy intake and energy expenditure. So we're focusing mainly on the changes that occur through adulthood and older age in this last section of the lecture. Now, our metabolism, it's made up of 4 key elements. We've got the BMR, the basal metabolic rate, which is the amount of energy that we burn at rest. We have NEAT, which is non-exercise activity thermogenesis, and EAT, which is the exercise activity thermogenesis. So NEAT would include things like walking to the car, going up the stairs instead of getting in the lift, just our movement day to day, our fidgeting, sitting at the desk right now, that's non-exercise activity thermogenesis. Our EAT is like going to the gym, so it's purposeful exercise. And then we have the thermic effect of feeding, and this is the energy that it takes to digest the foods that we eat. So let's have a closer look at BMR. Now, our BMR, our basal metabolic rate, also could be called resting metabolic rate, is the amount of energy that our bodies burn at rest. So if you just laid in bed for 24 hours, your BMR counts the energy it takes to keep you alive while resting. So how many calories are you burning to maintain, your breathing and your heart rate? Now, typically our BMR is the largest component of energy expenditure, and it comprises around 50 to 70% of total expenditure in most adults. And a decline in our BMR, it's well recognized with aging. So it's previously been documented that a decline in BMR with age is around 1 to 2% per decade, and that starts from our 20s and lasts until old age. Now, the main mechanism behind this decline in BMR that we see with aging is thought to be the changes that occur in our body composition. So muscle tissue is more metabolically active than adipose tissue. So if you had a kilo of muscle and a kilo of fat, the muscle would burn more calories or more energy at rest than the fat would. So as we age, when we see a decline in our muscle mass and a simultaneous increase in our fat mass, And this results in us losing the more metabolically active tissue and gaining the less metabolically active tissue, and resulting in a decline in the amount of energy it would take to keep us alive at rest. So if we have a look at the components of metabolism now that account for the activity that we do throughout the day, so this includes both the non-exercise activity and the exercise activity thermogenesis. So non-exercise activity thermogenesis being just the activity that we partake in during the day, whereas exercise activity being that purposeful exercise. We also see a decline in our activity-induced energy expenditure. Now, the changes or the decline in activity-induced energy expenditure that we see with age is not well understood, but it's likely due to lifestyle factors. So as we age, we're just more likely to sit around. Perhaps we have more joint pain, so we move less often, and this results in a decline in the activity that we do during the day. We can see from these figures that for both men and women, there's a decline in activity-induced energy expenditure, and it's quite a significant decline as well. So there's a big difference in the size of those columns that have the diagonal lines in them. And if you have a look at that 35 to 49 age range and compare that top portion of the column to the top portion of the column in the 60 to 74 age range, we see a big decline. And again, another big decline when we're looking at the 75 plus age range as well. We can also see in these figures the decline in that metabolic, or the basal metabolic rate that we just spoke about. And that's indicated by the white column there. So we have a slow decline with age in the basal metabolic rate as well, 1 to 2% per decade. So anyway, the decline that we see in physical activity and physical activity-induced energy expenditure throughout older age is likely due to the lifestyle factors associated with aging. And we see here the decline in total daily energy expenditure for both males and females across the lifespan. Now, the big question is, if I manage to go to the gym every single day into older age, can I avoid all of these problems? Can I maintain my total daily energy expenditure? Well, whilst there are many, many, many beneficial effects of maintaining exercise into older age, what we tend to see is that any increase in energy expenditure associated with aging seems to be offset by a decrease in voluntary energy expenditure at other times of the day. So we increase our exercise, and that is offset by a decrease in our NEAT at other times of the day. So we go to the gym, and that's great because we went to the gym, now we're more likely to neglect being active for the rest of the day. So we get to work and think, oh, I've been to the gym today, so I'm going to take the lift and not the stairs. Now, it's a bit of a double-edged sword. And even though the effects on energy balance from going to the gym would likely be small when we look at the whole day as a whole picture, the other additional beneficial effects of exercise are really, really, really important. So we've got positive effects on the cardiovascular system, bone health, helps prevent falls and frailty. So in no way am I saying that you shouldn't exercise when you're older because it means that you'll probably just be more sedentary during the day. No, that's not what we're saying here. What we're saying is that the effect of a training session on activity-induced energy expenditure throughout a day is quite small. We may involuntarily decrease our NEAT at other times of the day if we have gone to the gym. Now, it doesn't mean that we shouldn't go to the gym because there's so many beneficial effects. However, in terms of energy expenditure, the effect is likely not very big. Some of you guys may know this guy, James Smith, from Instagram, and he is literally obsessed with NEAT. So much so that his business revolves around trying to get people to become more aware of their non-exercise activity thermogenesis.
So a lot of you people are asking what NEAT is or what NEAT up 24/7 is. So imagine the width of this screen is the amount of calories you need in a day. About this amount is going to be your RMR. Then this component here is made out of NEAT and EAT. You don't really need to know what they stand for. So this is your EAT. This is what you do in the gym. NEAT is what you do outside the gym. To walk on an escalator or to park further from the shops would mean burning more calories, but it's not gym training. So it's expanding your NEAT. If you have days off the gym, you can increase your NEAT, which means you can still have the same deficit without having to go to the gym. So many people control their calories. So many people go to the gym, but so many people neglect their NEAT. Just being conscious of it to keep it up 24/7 will have a massive part to play in fat loss. Activity trackers are shit for determining the calories you're burning, but great for keeping on top of how much you fucking move. And that's NEAT. Up 24/7.
So clearly his prerogative is weight loss. However, he still makes a really good point, and that is that being more active by taking the stairs instead of the lift, by walking to the shops instead of driving to the shops, it's all going to increase our non-exercise activity thermogenesis and therefore increase our total daily energy expenditure. All right, and now we'll finally look at the fourth aspect of metabolism, which is the thermic effect of feeding. And this is the increase in energy expenditure that's associated with consuming and digesting food. And it makes up anywhere between around 8 to 15% of our total energy expenditure. Now, the energy expenditure required to digest food doesn't change with aging. However, we do see some declines with people with obesity or digestive issues that might limit nutrient absorption. So you guys may have heard this before, but it's the protein-rich foods that increase the thermic effect of feeding the most. So it takes the most energy for our bodies to break down and digest protein. And that's just one of the many, many, many reasons why weight loss diets are normally always high in protein. However, the main reason that weight loss diets are high in protein is to optimize weight loss from adipose tissue and maintain muscle mass. All right, guys, so that is it for physical development.